Hey interns, Dr. Chris, and today I'm reacting to MMA slams in the name of modern medical science. I recently came across a video entitled MMA slams that will make you say, damn, on the ITP MMA YouTube channel. And it does not disappoint. Well, it does disappoint from a medical perspective because, you know, of the propensity for injury. But if slams are your thing, then this video is just for you. These are some of the most intense slam finishes that I have ever seen. And today we're gonna analyze them with a critical medical eye to see what we can learn about human anatomy and more specifically, head and neck injuries. Where better to start than with Rampage Jackson.
Still got him in triangle choke area there. No, it's dangerous. He's got to get out. Oh, Dan, I told you he picked up.
Behold the slam in its purest form. As the aggressor lifts, then accelerates their opponent towards the ground, it's almost a simulation for a fall from a height. And depending on the exact angle and position of the fighter being slammed, a whole lot can go wrong. In this case, it looks like the head and the back of Brazilian fighter Ricardo Raynor make contact with the ground at the same time. The natural curvature of the cervical spine keeps it from absorbing the brunt of the downward force. Now, Raynor's brain is definitely bouncing around his cerebral spinal fluid inside the skull, and he will experience a concussion. Notice that I did say will, not might. This slam is definitely going to jiggle the jello upstairs. A forceful blow to the head creates two opportunities for traumatic brain injury. First, the brain crashes into the inside of the skull at the site of the impact, known as the coup, and then rebounds into the opposite side of the skull, the contra coup. Same thing here.
Takedown, knockout.
And here.
On the bottom end, Copper picks it up.
Fortunately, when the back of the head and the neck make contact with the ground simultaneously, this victim is protected, if only by a matter of degree and inches, from several other dangerous injury mechanisms that could very easily occur. In combat sports, a blow to the back of the head is illegal. And for good reason. Humans are especially vulnerable at the connection between the spine and the skull. The brain stem and the cervical spine really don't fare well under blunt force trauma.
The 31-year-old Williams seemed to hit Colon with a number of rabbit punches, illegal blows to the back of the head.
A blow to the back of the head, known colloquially as a rabbit punch, can cause severe damage.
Williams was on a roll in the 7th. Then he hit Colon behind the head again, sent him to the canvas.
This promising young boxer named Richard Colon was rendered quadriplegic shortly after sustaining several blows of this type in his fight versus Terrell Williams. Watching the footage from that night saddens and angers me. If Terrell Williams knew how dangerous rabbit punches could be, I'd like to believe he wouldn't have used the move so many times.
In the 9th, Williams knocked Colon down twice.
A brainstem injury can cause dizziness or lack of motor function, and in more severe cases, paralysis, coma, or even death.
Colon was left in what doctors call a vegetative state, unaware and unresponsive.
My thoughts are with his family. Likewise, a blow to the cervical spine could fracture a cervical vertebrae or damage and compress the spinal cord at that level. If the spinal cord is sufficiently damaged at a cervical level, the brain's ability to communicate with everything else in the body can be compromised. And if you've ever heard the saying, C345 keeps the diaphragm alive, you will know what I mean.
C345, keep it alive.
With each of these slams, I cringe a little bit knowing the extent of what could go wrong.
And closed at the same. Oh my lord! It's over!
For the victim, the angle of the slam and the curvature of their neck may keep the cervical spine and brainstem from direct contact with the canvas. But the occipital bone located on the lower back side of the skull is still in danger. This bone is relatively thin compared to the other bones of the skull, and if it fractures, a fragment could easily damage the brain and cause further injury. Even if the occipital bone avoids fracture, the occipital lobe located behind it could suffer contusion due to the concussive force of the coup mechanism. This segment of the brain is associated with visual recognition, visual attention, and spatial analysis, among other functions, any of which can become impaired from one of these slams.
But the arm's in trouble. Look at the strength of Matt Hughes.
And if we adjust the angle of the slam just slightly so that the back makes contact before the head, the fighters become more susceptible to a whiplash injury mechanism, which occurs when an abrupt back and forth motion extends the back or neck muscles beyond their normal range of motion, like the cracking of a whip.
Can't stay up there. Down goes Carlos Newton. He's out. He's out. He's out. Carlos Newton.
With his legs hooked around Matt Hughes' shoulders, Carlos Newton tightens his abdominal muscles and flexes his body forward, curling up towards his opponent. His downward trajectory is limited by the cage behind him, helping to maintain more flexion through the torso and cervical spine as Hughes propels him towards the mat. We get a little bit of a better view from the overhead angle.
A better vantage point. Bam! He hit the side of his head.
Watch as his right shoulder blade and upper back make contact with the ground a split second before the back of his head. Carlos's body's momentum stops as his back makes contact with the ground, and for a moment, his spine acts like a whip, and his head accelerates towards the mat. Then his head bounces upward off the floor back into flexion. Whiplash can strain the muscles and damage soft tissues, such as ligaments and nerves in your neck, varying in severity depending on the force of the mechanism involved.
Back up. There's gonna be a slam.
In this clip, the effect is even more pronounced. The slammee's back makes contact with the ground and their head jerks backward in an awkward combination of extension and compression. The bounce back is less pronounced here, but the announcers are impressed nonetheless. I, on the other hand, am concerned as whiplash can lead to disc herniation, where the gelatinous core of a spinal disc pushes out through a rupture in the disc's outer cartilage ring, and even spinal fracture. In this particular case, I might be concerned with a hangman's fracture to the C2 vertebrae, aptly named, since, well, but the distortion to the cervical spine can happen in other circumstances as well. In this instance, Tito Ortiz slams Evan Tanner to a gruesome rotational whiplash finish.
He said, I'm in the best shape of my fighting career.
Let's slow that down just for a second. Tanner's right shoulder makes contact with the ground and causes his head to snap to the right. It doesn't help that Tito pushes against Tanner's cheek, contributing to the rotational force. The sudden jerking motion of the head would rattle the brain as a punch to the jaw might, and the whipping motion of the neck would stress its tissues a la whiplash. This could result in a cervical rotational facet injury, or in a severe case, facet fractures and bilateral damage of the rotated vertebrae. These injuries contribute to rotational instability and require specific internal fixation based on a precise delineation of the injuries present.
To a double.
He's got it.
Bring him over here.
He's gonna walk him over to his corner.
Now, what happens when the aggressor traps their opponent's neck in place as they slam them into the canvas?
Oh, wow. He's out. That's it.
Here, as in the previous examples, a body part makes contact with the canvas first. The neck jerks forcefully and the head slams into the mat. Only this time, Jordan Levitt adds his body weight on top of Wyman's neck via strategically placed forearm. Due to the added pressure here, I can totally envision a cervical spine dislocation. The muscles and the ligaments in Wyman's neck are placed under immense strain as they attempt to maintain the structure of the spine. Unfortunately, the C7 vertebrae nearest his torso can't stretch or bend sufficiently to accommodate for the added pressure that Levitt is creating with his forearm. And it's limited from moving down towards the ground by the shoulder and torso.
Bam, that's
Right
it.
on the side of the head, too.
Levitt's forearm, which appears to be at about the C4 or C5 level, will push those vertebrae towards the canvas, encouraging a facet dislocation between them and the vertebrae closest to Wyman's torso. In a post-fight interview, Levitt said,
I was hoping to hurt him. You don't put your forearm across someone's neck unless you're trying to hurt somebody.
I would agree. He goes on to explain his thought process.
Yes, it helps me get more force, and it also helps me direct where he lands, know exactly where his head's gonna land and bounce or not bounce.
It's the not bounce that concerns me. At least if Wyman's head bounces off the canvas, the vertebrae aren't crushed into a position that they structurally cannot accommodate. But when you frame the neck,
Because he frames the neck so that he can get an extra hard slam. Yep, left arm up, bam.
When asked if he would have thrown an arm out behind himself to slow the crashing momentum, Levitt said,
How would you defend against something like that?
Hell yeah. I mean, I post my arm. I'd rather have a broken arm than a broken neck, I suppose.
Good point.
I can't really tell if he's joking, but this just means that he knew the risks. Matt Wyman was given a 45-day medical suspension after that fight, but thankfully he recovered. Although it would be his last time in the UFC ring, and he announced his retirement shortly after that fight. Interesting timing. Maybe his injuries were worse than he let on.
Probably got an amazing guillotine, a lot of confidence into it. You know, anyone willing to just go to their back to potentially get that choke has probably got a good one.
This example is a little harder to see, but pay close attention to the aggressor's right forearm. Once his opponent's neck is framed, he actually leaves his feet, adding extra momentum and weight as his body comes crashing down on top of his opponent. Can we just freeze frame them in the air for a second?
It's probably got a good one.
This literally has knockout written all over it, for all the reasons we've talked about so far, plus the fact that they are airborne. Bam! In many of these cases, it seems like the fighter doing the slamming is defending themselves from a dangerous submission attempt by their opponent. When a fighter commits to a submission, their movement is compromised as they try to lock their opponent in place. Sure, they may tap, but they also might do this.
He's round the neck. Wow. We have 1 minute left. He slams him down. Oh, he's out!
Look at the force generated by the hand across the face. Ouch. And if we take a trip back to UFC 16, we'll see Frank Shamrock take this concept up a notch as he drills his shoulder into Igor Zinovev's head and neck. Frank lifts Igor, then leaps off the canvas before sticking his shoulder into the crick of Igor's neck upon landing. And as the announcer says, Igor is out cold. This would be the last time the Russian fighter would ever grace the ring due to the injuries he sustained. His collarbone was crushed under Shamrock's weight, and he was later diagnosed with a fractured vertebrae in his neck. I was unable to find an injury report detailing which vertebrae had been broken, but the compressive force on the front of the neck could literally crush any of the vertebrae in the cervical spine. Not only might you end up with a fracture dislocation of the spine due to the combination of cervical flexion and rotation, but you might also end up with a Lafort facial fracture as well, as a result of the force of Shamrock's shoulder against the maxilla when the head contacted the canvas. Between that and the collarbone repair, Igor is surely now walking around with surgical hardware in this general area. Many factors combine in each of these slams to create a dangerous situation for the fighter on the receiving end. Height, weight, whether or not your opponent slams his forearm into your neck, those kinds of things. And now I want to show you some slams where the landing angle takes center stage.
Fight pass. Don't miss the live action next week. Headline by 2.
I mean, no, the neck does not enjoy being forced into rotation and extension suddenly by way of face to canvas slam. You can see the muscular tension and coordination disappear the instant Ward makes contact with the ground. He's not quite limp, but he's no longer fully coordinated. Props to the ref for stopping the fight quickly, as Ward is definitely not in any state to continue, and Bufando shows no signs of letting up. Now, I believe Charlie Ward's disorientation is likely due to the initial bump of the head rather than a more severe neck injury.
He's got the body lock and he's looking to land it.
Believe it or not, his neck has not rotated or extended into a position of hyperextension that concerns me too much, though the speed of the impact could easily sprain a ligament or strain a muscle. I am mildly concerned about a vertebral facet fracture, however. These are pairs of small joints in between the vertebrae in the back of the spine that protrude towards each other, like a smaller version of the bony provinces that stick up from the back of some dinosaurs, but they point up and down. The facets provide fine-tuning of the relative locations of one vertebra to its adjacent vertebrae. When the neck bends forcefully and quickly into extension, the facets along the back of the cervical spine get squished together, and it's possible that one of them breaks. When this occurs, treatment usually involves closed or open reduction followed by surgical stabilization. And this is not typically the way that we reduce facet dislocations. Oh yeah. But there was no extensive injury report following this bout, and Charlie Ward is still fighting in 2022. A scary moment, but true to his heritage, Charlie has the luck of the Irish.
My goodness! Benitez lifting Bondanai off, trying to slam him off, and he does, and he's out!
Here, Humberto Bandenet nearly has an armbar locked in on Gabriel Benitez, until Benitez lifts him off the mat and slams him onto his side. Here, the result is a completely stiff body and full-fledged loss of consciousness. As Humberto lands, his shoulder hits the ground first and his neck jerks sharply into right lateral flexion as his head accelerates towards the canvas. The tissues in the neck are strained again further as his head bounces back upwards. Now, if you're gonna be hit in the head, the best place to do it is likely the forehead, where the bone is very thick. Richard Bloodstein, a medical student on Quora, recounts this story. I remember as a medical student, a teenager who had been shot in the forehead by a .22 caliber from a long distance. The bullet skittered between his skull and the skin covering the skull, coming to rest at the back of his head.
Excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute?
I spent several hours repairing the furrow. When I was done, he refused observation in the hospital and ran off to find the person who had shot him.
How my head look, Mike?
Richard goes on to say that the worst place to be hit is in the temple, on the side of the head.
Here's the slam.
His assertion is correct. The skull is much weaker at the temple. It is in this location that 4 of the bones that make up your skull meet: the sphenoid, temporal, parietal, and frontal bones. The temporal artery, which supplies blood to the scalp and facial muscles, runs right behind this bony juncture. And if a fracture occurs in this area, the jagged edge of one of the bones involved could cause a laceration to this artery. This artery assists in delivering oxygenated blood from the heart to the regions within the neck and the head. Though not the main blood vessel charged with supplying oxygen to the head, that would be the carotid and vertebral arteries, you still don't want it lacerated. Fracture or no, the portion of the brain likely to sustain the most damage in a bump to the side of the head is the temporal lobe, which plays a role in understanding language, memory acquisition, face recognition, object recognition, perception, and processing auditory information. Are we beginning to see why slamming someone here could be dangerous?
Close. Look at the strength. Oh my God, with a huge slam.
This slam causes the victim to go stiff as a board immediately. He then sustains a strong punch to the chin as he begins convulsing. It looks like the initial slam, not anything having to do with his neck, which remains relatively straight as he makes contact with the ground, is the cause of the convulsions. Watch closely when the contractions begin, and we can rule out the punch once he has been grounded as the cause as well. His right leg starts twitching as the punch connects. Now, this looks a lot like a seizure caused by traumatic brain injury, which is a relatively uncommon occurrence. Approximately 1 out of 10 people who are hospitalized after traumatic brain injury will have a seizure, most of them happening within a few days or weeks after the initial injury. Obviously, as in this case, they can occur much sooner, but there are some subtle delineations based on the timing of the seizure that should be understood. An article in the Journal of Academic Emergency Medicine states, any seizure that occurs within 24 hours of traumatic brain injury, with the sole exception of a convulsion occurring within seconds of the injury, should be considered an early post-traumatic seizure and not a concussive convulsion. Some authors suggest that most impact seizures are non-epileptic in origin and hence coined the term concussive convulsions for benign impact seizures. Research suggests that a concussive convulsion is an uncommon consequence of head injury, thought to be a brief traumatic functional decerebration that results from loss of cortical inhibition. Decerebration refers to the posture that the body assumes, and inhibition is the blocking of action stemming from the cerebral or cerebellar cortices, a phenomenon that can limit everything from the way a person moves to how they feel, see, and even hear. Our slam victim will be happy to hear that concussive convulsions require no specific management beyond immediate first aid measures, such as protection of the airway. However, the management of a concussive injury severe enough to cause a concussive convulsion will warrant some time off. Rose Namajunas was on the receiving end of a monster slam in her UFC title bout versus Jessica Andrade. I cringe when I watch her full body weight crash down on top of her neck in lateral flexion. It looks like the back of her head is the first thing to make contact with the canvas, but the angle and momentum of the slam snap the side of her head towards the mat. Her body rotates around her head once she hits the ground, and her neck moves towards forward flexion before it slips out from underneath her back into the upright position. She is obviously disoriented, but does not lose consciousness and even attempts to defend herself, albeit unsuccessfully, after the collision. Both good signs.
And as we see here, she switches her head to the outside, just as DC said, and put her on her head. That is the one thing that counters a Kimura.
Extreme lateral flexion can result in a fracture or dislocation of the vertebrae in the cervical spine. And in severe cases, quadriplegia or quadriparesis, which is a condition in which you have muscle weakness in all 4 of your limbs, both arms and both legs, can result. Injuries caused by this mechanism are often associated with brachial plexus injuries. The brachial plexus is a network of nerves in the shoulder that carries movement and sensory signals to and from the spinal cord. If you've ever heard the term stinger in relation to football, the brachial plexus is what has been injured.
The head gets hit this way and compresses the nerves coming to the arm, or the head can go the other way and can stretch those nerves.
A helmet-to-helmet collision to the side of the head can cause this type of injury to occur. Like that. And in the UFC, without the protective pads, Rose's neck can bend further into lateral flexion, exacerbating the tension placed upon the bundle of nerves.
And go to the switch of the outside leg of Andrade. She did.
Miraculously, Rose walked out of that fight unscathed, stating in a post-fight interview, "Actually, the neck problems that I had went away after getting slammed on my neck." Which is kind of weird and sort of a miracle for me. Which makes Jessica Andrade a chiropractor? I don't think I can support a method that is even more forceful than the Y-strap.
If this guy pulled any longer or harder, these people would be dead.
Now, if the landing angle changes slightly, as might occur with a suplex-style slam, the impact causes more forward flexion of the cervical spine. Both vertebral wedge fractures and fractures of the odontoid process can occur as a result of forceful flexion. A wedge fracture usually occurs in the front of the vertebrae, collapsing the bone in the front of the spine and leaving the back of the same bone unchanged, which results in the vertebrae taking on a wedge shape. As the neck folds forward under the pressure of the falling fighter, you can see how this might occur. The odontoid process is a superior projecting bony element from the second cervical vertebrae. It stacks up through the first cervical vertebrae like a peg through a hole, and the first cervical vertebrae, or the atlas, rotates around the odontoid process to provide the largest single component of lateral rotation of the cervical spine.
He's so small.
This bone can fracture if flexion occurs with enough force, as it isn't built to withstand that type of bending. Now, up until this point, we've talked a lot about damage to the head and cervical spine. But even when those structures don't bear the brunt of the impact, the slam victim is not out of harm's way. Here, the slam victim is knocked out cold without his head touching the ground. There is some whiplash effect going on here, but his head remains relatively straight, falling into extension as his body goes limp. An interesting case. What do you think, interns? Leave a comment down below if you've got an idea. Before I sign off, I'd like to extend an invitation to any of you watching and interested in moving pain-free. Come join me at my online gym, Human 2.0 Fitness, right here on YouTube, where we specialize in helping you move better. And as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho, where we see one, do one, teach one.